Hey there, it's V from Movies Hunter, and I'm here to give you the lowdown on a classic drama romance film called Spring, Summer, Fall, Winter, and Spring. It's really cool, it's a great title. It's from 2003, very classic key. But before we get into the sappy details, let me give you a little background on what this movie is all about. This movie takes you on a journey through the seasons, following the life of a Buddhist monk who lives in a floating temple in a serene lake. So, your average Wednesday. We open on the stunning, peaceful, forested mountains of Korea, and there's this little floating Buddhist monastery just chilling in the middle of a pond. And who do we have here? The wise old master Shifu and his mischievous young apprentice Kung Fu Panda. They hop on their trusty rowboat and head to the bank where they'll gather some herbs, take a walk, and probably do some yoga or something. But hold on, how do they get in and out of this floating palace? Easy peasy. There's a handy-dandy door at the bank, and we're starting our story in the midst of spring. The fearless young apprentice ventures out into the forest all by himself to collect some herbs. They gather all the goods and it's back to the boat to return to the monastery. So what does the young whippersnapper do all day? Well, he's got a dog to play with, a boat to paddle, and endless hours of boredom to fill. And then one day he decides to have a little fun. He catches a fish from a nearby creek and ties a stone to it with string. As the fish flails about, he can't help but laugh, and then he does the same thing to a frog and a snake. But little does he know the master is watching, and let's just say he is not impressed. The young apprentice is in for a lesson in compassion and kindness. So one fine evening, smack! The master decides to play a little game with his apprentice. He ties a big, shiny rock to the poor guy's back. The next morning, the apprentice wakes up and realizes he has been rock-jacked. He pleads with the master to take it off, but the master, being the strict mentor he is, tells him he can't until he finds and frees the animals he once tormented. Fast forward to the boy paddling away on his little boat trying to walk through the forest with a rock on his back. It's like a scene from a cartoon, right? But it's not a laughing matter, as he soon realizes the fish he tormented is lying dead at the bottom of the creek. And to make matters worse, the snake is also lying dead in a pool of blood. The boy is inconsolable as he cries heavily, realizing the pain he has caused. Fast forward a few years later, and the boy is all grown up and looking sharp, like a pencil. He encounters a mother and daughter who are lost and looking for the monastery. He greets them with a smile and rows them back across the lake, feeling like a real man. So the mother and her sick daughter walk into the monastery, looking for some herbal magic to cure her, and the master, being the saint that he is, agrees to help them. Little did he know he was also inviting some trouble in the form of the apprentice's hormones. The first time the apprentice sees the daughter, it's like love at first sight, or more like, lust at first sight. But who are we to judge? They're just humans. The next day, the mother takes off, leaving the daughter in the capable hands of the master and the not-so-capable hands of the apprentice. Days pass, and our love-struck apprentice right here can't help but to be drawn to the girl. And then one fateful day, he finds her sleeping in front of the Buddha statue, and, well, let's just say he couldn't resist temptation. But before he knows it, she is slapping him in the face, and he is filled with guilt. Praying becomes his new hobby. But wait. The girl touches his shoulder, forgives him, and suddenly they're both drawn to each other like moths to a flame. They spend their days wandering off into the forest, just like Dora, indulging in forbidden love. It's all sunshine and rainbows until one day, the master discovers them asleep, naked, in a boat. He gently wakes them up by pulling the plug, and instead of yelling, he calmly says, "Lust leads to the desire for possession, and possession leads to murder." Deep, man, deep. Alas, all good things must come to an end. The girl has recovered from her illness, and it's time for her to go back home. So the next morning, the master rows her ashore, tells her to go back to reality, and that's that. Now, the heartbroken apprentice just couldn't handle being without the girl, so he took a little field trip with the Buddha statue and a rooster in Ted. A few years later, the master is cruising back from a supply run when he sees an old friend in the newspaper's Most Wanted section. He knows it's only a matter of time before the apprentice comes crawling back to the monastery, so he decides to do a little wardrobe shopping. A few days later, the prodigal son returns, filled to the brim with anger and rage. The master asks about his adventures outside the monastery, and the apprentice replies, "The real world isn't all it's cracked up to be. I left for the girl, but she was a cheater and started seeing another guy. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I murdered my wife." He returns the Buddha statue and whips out the murder weapon still stained with his wife's blood. The master takes a step back but decides to give the dude a chance to explain himself. As the days pass, the apprentice is feeling more and more guilty for his sin, which is kind of a bummer because guilt is just not a fun emotion. But one day he decides to really make things interesting by sealing himself up in a suicide ritual. So much for not wanting to stick around for the consequences, right? But the master comes in just in time to save the day and beats the poor guy mercilessly. "You can't just kill yourself like that, buddy," the master declares. "Not after what you've done." Next, the master ties the apprentice to the ceiling like some kind of creepy human mobile and sets a candle to burn through the rope. Meanwhile, the master is busy writing the Heart Sutra on the monastery deck because nothing screams dramatic like ancient Buddhist scripture. Eventually, the apprentice falls and the master gives him a fresh haircut and orders him to carve the words into the wood. Just when you think things couldn't get any more dramatic, two detectives show up to arrest the apprentice, but the master steps in and asks for a little more time for the carving to be completed. So the apprentice spends the night carving away, and the detectives help with the painting. Once everything is done, the master wakes the exhausted apprentice and tells him it's time to go. But wait, the boat won't move. It's like the master doesn't want the apprentice to leave because he's just that attached. Finally, the apprentice turns around and sees the master one last time and the boat starts moving. So the detectives leave with the apprentice, and the monastery doors shut behind them on their own. The boat sails back to the master like it's a ghost ship, and the master knows his time is up. So he decides to build a pyre on the boat. And the death ritual with sealing the ears, eyes, nose, and mouth with paper. It's a little overkill, but whatever. The master sets the boat on fire, meditates, and poof, he's gone in a blaze of glory. Fast forward a few years, and the apprentice is finally released. He returns to the frozen monastery and finds his master's clothes all laid out like it's waiting for him. The apprentice then digs out his master's teeth from the frozen boat, and the statue of Buddha carved out of ice is quite impressive. Wrapping the master's sarira in red clothes and placing it in the statue, it's like a very sacred reliquary. The apprentice trains himself in the freezing weather with an old book of choreographic meditation stances. And finally, a woman arrives with her baby son and leaves him behind like he is a library book. She wraps a shawl around her face like she's trying to hide from the paparazzi. After a long day of praying, she flees into the night, but just as she's running across a frozen lake, she stumbles into a hole in the ice like she's playing human whack-a-mole. The next morning, the monk stumbles upon her lifeless body floating in the water. He drags her out and rips off the shawl to get a good look at her face. So much for a peaceful day at the monastery. One day he decides to tie the largest circular stone in the monastery to his body, ready to take on his final training challenge. I mean, who needs a healthy breakfast when you have a giant stone to carry? He grabs a statue of this one because who says you can't multitask, and begins his journey to the top of the tallest mountain. Carrying both the statue and the stone, he reflects on his past life tormenting innocent creatures like the fish, frog, and snake. As he makes his way to the summit, he realizes he may have bitten off more than he can chew, but he refuses to give up. The struggle is real, but he perseveres. Finally reaching the top, he starts praying and admiring the beautiful view of the monastery far below. It's a good thing he didn't give up because now he is the new master of the place. Years later, we meet a young boy who is an apprentice at the monastery. The abandoned baby from the beginning of the movie has grown up and is now tormenting a turtle. I don't know. He wanders into the same hills his master once did and continues the cycle by tormenting the fish, frog, and snake with stones. The giggles echo through the mountains, reminding us that the cycle of life goes on and on and on. And that, my friends, is a story of spring, summer, fall, winter, and spring. See you in the next hunt. I love you. See you la. Bye.